the General Assembly will hear a presentation by the Secretary General of his annual report on the work of the organization under Agenda Item 110. I now give the floor to the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, distinguished heads of state and government, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here in a spirit of gratitude and humility for the trust you have placed in me to serve the world's peoples. We, the peoples, and the United Nations face grave challenges. Our world is in trouble. People are hurting and angry, and they see insecurity rising, inequality growing, conflict spreading, and climate changing. The global economy is increasingly integrated, but our sense of global community may be disintegrated. Societies are fragmented, political discourse is polarized, and trust within and among countries is being driven down by those who demonize and divide. We are a world in pieces. We need to be a world at peace. And I strongly believe that together we can build peace, we can restore trust and create a better world for all. Excellencies, I will focus today on 7 threats and tests that stand in our way. For each, the dangers are all too clear. Yet for each, if we act as truly United Nations, we can find answers. First, the nuclear peril. The use of nuclear weapons should be unthinkable. Even the threat of their use can never be condoned. But today, global anxieties about nuclear weapons are at the highest level since the end of the Cold War. And the fear is not abstract. Millions of people live under a shadow of dread cast by the provocative nuclear and missile tests of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And within the DPRK itself, such tests do nothing to ease the plight of those who are suffering hunger and severe violations of their human rights. I condemn those tests unequivocally. And I call on the DPRK and all member states to fully comply with Security Council resolutions. Last week's unanimous adoption of Resolution 2375 tightens sanctions and sends a clear message regarding the country's international obligations. I appeal to the Council to maintain its unity. Only that unity can lead to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and, as the resolution recognizes, create an opportunity for diplomatic engagement to resolve the crisis. When tensions rise, so does the chance of miscalculation. Fiery talk can lead to fatal misunderstandings. The solution must be political, and this is a time for statesmanship. We must not sleepwalk our way into war. And more broadly, all countries must show greater commitment to the universal goal of a world without nuclear weapons. And the nuclear weapon states have a special responsibility to lead. Today, proliferation is creating unimaginable danger, and disarmament is paralyzed. There is an urgent need to prevent proliferation, to promote disarmament, and to preserve the gains made in these directions. And these goals are linked. Progress on one will generate progress on the other. Excellencies, let me turn to the global threat of terrorism. Nothing justifies terrorism. No cause, no grievance. Terrorism continues to take a rising toll of deaths and devastation. It is destroying societies, destabilizing regions, and diverting energy from more productive pursuits. National and multilateral counterterrorism efforts have indeed disrupted networks, reclaimed territory, prevented attacks, and saved lives. But we need to intensify this work. Stronger international cooperation remains crucial against terrorism. And I'm grateful to the General Assembly for approving one of my first reform initiatives, the establishment of the UN Office of Counterterrorism. Next year, I intend to convene the first ever gathering of heads of counterterrorism agencies of member states to forge a new international counterterrorism partnership. But it is not enough to fight terrorists on the battlefield or to deny them funds. We must do more to address the roots of radicalization, including real and perceived injustices and high levels of unemployment and grievance among young people. Political, religious, and community leaders have a duty to stand up against hatred and serve as models of tolerance and moderation. And together we need to make full use of UN instruments and expand our efforts to support the survivors. But experience has also shown that harsh crackdowns and heavy-handed approaches are counterproductive. As soon as we believe that violations of human rights and democratic freedoms are necessary to win the fight, we might have lost the war. Excellencies, third, unresolved conflicts and systematic violations of international humanitarian law. We are all shocked by the dramatic escalation of sectarian tensions in Myanmar's Rakhine State. A vicious circle of persecution, discrimination, radicalization, and violent repression has led more than 400,000 desperate people to flee, putting regional stability at risk. I take note of State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi's address today and their intention to implement the recommendations of the Advisory Committee on Rakhine State that was chaired by Kofi Annan within the shortest time possible. But let me emphasize again, the authorities in Myanmar must end the military operations, allow unhindered humanitarian access, and recognize the right of refugees to return in safety and dignity. And they must also address the grievances of the Rohingya, whose status has been left unresolved for far too long. Excellencies, no one is winning today's wars. From Syria to Yemen, from South Sudan to the Sahel, Afghanistan and elsewhere, only political solutions can bring peace. And we should have no illusions. We will not be able to eradicate terrorism if we do not resolve the conflicts that are creating the disorder within which violent extremists flourish. Last week, I announced the creation of a high-level advisory board on mediation. And those eminent individuals will allow us to be more effective in brokering peace around the world. And the United Nations is forging closer partnerships with key regional organizations, such as the African Union, the European Union, the League of Arab States, and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. We continue to strengthen and modernize peacekeeping, protecting civilians, and saving lives around the world. And since taking office, I have sought to bring together the parties to conflict, as well as those that have influence on them. As a meaningful example, I'm particularly hopeful about tomorrow's meeting on Libya. Last month, I visited Israel and Palestine. We must not let today's stagnation in the peace process lead to tomorrow's escalation. We must restore the hopes of the peoples, and the two-state solution remains the only way forward, and it must be pursued urgently. Excellencies, but I must be frank. In too many cases, the warring parties believe war is the answer. They may speak of a willingness to compromise, but their actions too often betray a thirst for outright military victory at any cost. Violations of international humanitarian law are rampant, and impunity prevails. And civilians are paying the highest price, with women and girls facing systematic violence and oppression. I've seen in my country and in my years at the United Nations that it is possible to move from war to peace and from dictatorship to democracy. Let us push ahead with a surge in diplomacy today and a leap in conflict prevention for tomorrow. Excellencies, fourth, climate change puts our hopes in jeopardy. Last year was the hottest ever, and the past decade has been the hottest on record. Average global temperature keeps climbing, glaciers are receding, and permafrost is declining. Millions of people and trillions of assets are at risk from rising seas and other climate disruptions. And the number of natural disasters has quadrupled since 1970. The United States, followed by China, India, the Philippines, and Indonesia, have experienced the most disasters since '95, more than 1,600, or once every 5 days. And I stand in solidarity with the people of the Caribbean and the United States. We have just suffered through Hurricane Irma, the longest-lasting Category 5 storm ever recorded. And Maria is already on its way. We should not link any single weather event with climate change. But scientists are clear that such extreme weather is precisely what their models predict will be the new normal of a warming world. We have had to update our language to describe what is happening. We now talk of mega hurricanes, superstorms, and rain bombs. And it's time to get off the path of suicidal emissions. We know enough today to act. The science is unassailable, and I urge governments to implement the historic Paris Agreement with ever greater ambition. And I commend those cities that are setting bold targets, and I welcome the initiatives of thousands of private enterprises, including major oil and gas companies that are betting on a clean, green future. Energy markets tell us that green business is good business. And the falling cost of renewables is one of the most encouraging stories on the planet today. So is the growing evidence that economies can grow as emissions go down. New markets, more jobs, opportunities to generate trillions in economic output. The facts are clear, solutions are staring us in the face, leadership needs to catch up. Cinquièmement, les inégalités croissantes minent les fondements de la...
Growing inequality undermines society and the social contract. Integration of world economies, the expansion of trade and technological advances of a spectacular nature have brought amazing wealth. So many people have been able to get out of extreme poverty than ever before. More and more people today are living longer and better lives, but progress is not fair. We see crying disparities in income, equality of opportunity, and access to the results of innovation and technology. There are regions and communities that are far away from these waves of growth, left to their resources in their parts of the world. And this exclusion has a price: exclusion, alienation, and instability. But we have a plan to change course and bring about fair globalization. And that plan is the 2030 Agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, half of our world is female. Half of our world is under 25 years old. We can't wait for the Sustainable Development Goals before we address the issue of women and the energy of young people. And we know how quickly we need to move. We know that with billions in assets, it's not money that we're lacking. What we need is wisdom. We need to use the tools, the plans and the resources that we already have to bring about sustainable development that will benefit everyone. This is an objective in itself, but it's also our best instrument to prevent conflicts. Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, innovation is something that we must address. Technology will continue to be at the heart of shared technology, but innovation, as essential as it is for humanity, can have unforeseeable consequences. Threats linked to cybersecurity are on the increase. Internet war is increasingly out in the open. It's increasingly able to disturb relations between states and to destroy hundreds of structures of modern life. Progress in cyberspace certainly should give people more freedom, but the dark web is showing that some people use this potential to harm others and serve themselves. Artificial intelligence is something that can stimulate development and improve living conditions in a spectacular fashion, but it can also have a dramatic effect on work life and on global society and on the very social fabric of society. Genetic engineering is now becoming a reality, but it has given rise to unresolved new ethical dilemmas. Unless it's dealt with in a responsible way, this progress could cause incalculable damage. Ladies and gentlemen, governments and international organizations are quite simply not prepared for this new situation. The traditional forms of regulating affairs are no longer valid. Clearly, these kinds of trends and capacities require a new strategic thinking, a new ethical way of thinking and regulating these affairs. The United Nations is prepared to be a forum where member states, civil society, companies and the academic world can meet together to discuss the way forward that will benefit everyone.
Finally, I want to talk about human mobility, which I do not perceive as a threat, even if some do. I see it as a challenge that, if properly managed, can help bring the world together. Let us be clear. We do not only face a refugee crisis, we also face a crisis of solidarity. Every country has the right to control its own borders, but that must be done in a way that protects the rights of people on the move. Instead of closed doors and open hostility, we need to re-establish the integrity of the refugee protection regime and the simple decency of human compassion. With a truly global sharing of responsibility, the number of refugees we face can be managed. But too many states have not risen to the moment. And I commend those countries that have shown admirable hospitality to millions of forcibly displaced people. We need to do more to support them. And we also need to do more to face the challenges of migration. The truth is that the majority of migrants move in a well-ordered fashion, making positive contributions to their host countries and homelands. It is when migrants move in unregulated ways that the risks become clear. Risks for states, but most especially risks for migrants themselves exposed to perilous journeys. Migration has always been with us. And climate change, demographics, instability, growing inequalities, and aspirations for a better life, as well as unmet needs in labor markets, mean it is here to stay. And the answer is effective international cooperation in managing migration to ensure that its benefits are most widely distributed and that the human rights of all concerned are properly protected. From my experience, I can assure you that most people prefer to realize their aspirations at home. But we must work together. Development cooperation must be oriented in a way to to make sure that they can do so. Migration should be an option, not a necessity. And we also need a much stronger commitment of the international community to crack down on human traffickers and to protect their victims. But let's be clear, we will not end the tragedies on the Mediterranean, the Andaman Sea and elsewhere without creating more opportunities for regular migration. These will benefit migrants and countries alike. I myself am a migrant, as are many of you in this room. But no one expected me to risk my life on a leaky boat or to cross a desert in the back of a truck to find employment outside my country of birth. Safe migration cannot be limited to the global elite. Refugees, internally displaced persons, internally displaced persons and migrants are not the problem. The problem lies in conflict, persecution, and hopeless poverty. And I've been pained to see the way refugees and migrants have been stereotyped and scapegoated, and to see political figures stoke resentment in search of electoral gain. In today's world, all societies are becoming multicultural, multi-ethnic, and multi-religious. And this diversity must be seen as a richness, not as a threat. But to make diversity a success, we need to invest in social cohesion, so that all people feel that their identities are respected and that they have a stake in the community as a whole. Excellencies, we need to reform our world, and I'm committing to reforming the United Nations. Together, we have embarked on a comprehensive reform effort to build a UN development system to support states in bettering people's lives, to reinforce our ability to safeguard people's peace, security, and human rights, and to embrace management practices that advance those goals instead of hindering them. We have launched a new victim-centered approach to preventing sexual exploitation and abuse. And we have a roadmap to achieve gender parity at the United Nations, and we are already on our way. Excellencies, we are here to serve, to relieve the suffering of we the peoples, and to help fulfill their dreams. We come from different corners of the world. Our cultures, religions, and traditions vary widely, and I would say wonderfully. At times, there are competing interests among us. At others, there is even open conflict. And that is exactly why we need the United Nations. And that is exactly why multilateralism is today more important than ever. We call ourselves the international community. We must act as one, because only together, as United Nations, can we fulfill the promise of the Charter and advance human dignity for all. Thank you, shukran, xie xie, merci, spasiba, gracias, bem-aja.